What, are you gonna do it here, or,
No, I will do it like that because that will
well,
be
then you
oh,
wanna move the light over? So you
it's
can,
live.
sorry, I love back office help, and they're pushing buttons without me knowing. I wanted to run a video with you guys, to discuss brain tumors, brain trauma, and infant development. A lot of people really believe, and rightfully so, that in infants that the brain trauma comes and will affect the way a baby will move. But I wanted to go into it a little bit differently than what you're used to hearing, because we move before our brain formally develops on our cognitive functions. Our movement is there for our infant's development, and that's why we milestones a certain way. We're meant to milestones a certain way because we want to hit most of our major milestones before the skull totally fuses. So most people are more familiar with the anterior, the soft spot in the front of the head, or the superior soft spot, the fontanelle. But it all comes together for a reason. So most of your major milestones should be hitting before this happens. But what happens if your child did have brain trauma or worse, a tumor? The reason I'm bringing this up, because I have a situation with one of my clients, or was my clients. I had a 5.5-month-old baby. And just like this, I just was working with the child. Now, the child already had a diagnosis of cerebral palsy and epilepsy. And this was, he's now 7 or 8, and he's going for massive brain surgery because the tumor has gotten out of control. But I started to work with him, and I know cerebral palsy, I know a lot of different rare genetics, I know a lot of different, you can have a stroke in utero, there's so many different versions of trauma. And none of us, we think of this even before we're having our children, but life happens. My son had massive facial infections that I'm gonna bring into this a little bit. But what my son did for me is give my hands a sensitivity that most people don't have. So here's a perfect example. When you're having the sinuses like this, right? Now I've broken off one of my sinuses. I can put this thing on a scale right now and it will show a deviation in weight. This side will appear heavier. So when I was working with this young man or this baby at 5.5 months old, I know a lot of how a brain trauma or a tumor or infection affect the way my hands feel weight, for lack of a better words. This again being a prime example, right? I do not have this on the other side. Now you can say it's like a 0.5 gram or whatever it is, it's still a weight differential. And if a scale is sensitive enough for that, your hands can be too. So I was working, and I said to his mother, I said, you have a right to be concerned, but this isn't CP. And they're like, yes it is, yes it is. Well, unfortunately, long story short, the MRI was read wrong, and it was actually a brain tumor that was encroaching, and it's now quite massive, because even though a tumor can be benign, it's gonna grow, or it can grow, I should say. I'm not a doctor, I'm a movement coach. So I knew that the child had developmental concerns, but it clearly wasn't at 5.5 months old what should be showing up if it was specific brain trauma. And again, me not being a doctor, people trusting their doctors for whatever reason, the child wasn't re-examined to the age of 2 when the seizures really started kicking in. And by then the tumor had gone into the bone of the base of the brain. But that's another thing. When I'm working with a child, any person, I'm looking at the way that they are processing, they are organizing movement. We're all individuals for a reason. The way that my bones are put together, my nervous system, my heart, cardiac, cardiovascular, I don't have diabetes, so just even alone, my cellular viscosity rate's gonna be off, meaning that, let's say right now, if I had sugars at 500, my circulatory system is gonna be a lot heavier, right, than someone that has sugars of 80 or 89, let's say, right? We are built, that's why doctors do these labs, to be between, let's say, it used to be 80 and 120, but now they like it between 80 and 100. And most people say, so what? Well, you're supposed to exercise, and let me tell you, it is very hard to get off your couch if your sugars are flirting at about 250 and above. You're just too heavy from the way that your body was organized to move. And it seems something so simple as that, but you'll learn more about that in my book that's coming out. You can't get to Mars without me. But I teach this, right? So if you were in my cranial program right now, you've actually just gone through over 200 videos of just variations of how to work with the head. Now, that being said, when you have a tumor, there's a mass weight differential that's different. Now, what does that come into play? We have gravity. So right now, if I drop this is plastic, it's going to fall to the ground. But right now, I'm not falling to the ground. Because why? I'm a living organism. I'm capable of falling down, but I do not fall down. Your plants don't fall down overnight in the middle of the night. When we are opposing gravity, we're doing so. But what's interesting, let's say if I have an infection in my hand or my appendix or something to that effect, any death that occurs or trauma in the body or mass like that has to be removed. And what happens is that mass is acting like a weight. When you have a mass, and that's what we call, let's say, cancer, it's the volume. Sorry guys, that's what's the problem with lives on phones. And as you can see, not only do I like Harry Potter, but that's Hedwig's theme, and my grandmother was Hedwig, so we had that too. So I'm covering two stones. So when you have the mass, right, mass wants to find the floor. That's what it does. This skull, it's inanimate, it's plastic, is not going to jump off the floor. I'm going to go off the floor and back on it, right? The floor is my table, my elbows can come up and down. The only way I do so purposely that I teach is with rotational movements. But within the brain itself, you have spinal fluid. Now, spinal fluid is the only place where death can occur and stay within the body, right? So if you've had a blood-brain barrier or any of that, or a mass, it doesn't necessarily have to be removed. If there's death within the brain or an infection or that kind of thing, now I'm not saying that it's not going to cause complications. Again, I'm talking about what happens to the movements and what you're looking for. So when I see a child, literally, and I say this all the time, the head is too heavy. A lot of it could be organization of vision, but just this, a little baby that has a minor ear infection, something that you wouldn't think much of, just to roll over, they now have to put might. A baby doesn't work with might, they work with weight transfer. Right? But so if I just do even something like this, right? That's not, so it'll be heavier, just like a boat in the water. So a baby does not have the cognitive prowess to overcome these kind of conditions, right? So this is where you've got this little cocktail going on where a child is becoming special needs in that sense. So that special needs, that what's going on with a child is really because you're trying to make sense of why they're organizing differently. So you part of the brain like this, if I have this inside, and let's say that's the mass, wants to go to the floor because it's a mass. But there's part of the brain that wants to come away from the floor because it's a living organism, right? And so depending on where the mass is, just even in general, can affect development. Depending on how large the mass is, can affect development. But knowing how to now show that system, how to start moving despite having what I call more so deviations in your development or in your structure, that's another thing. So that's more what you can expect, not only at movement lesson, but what should be expecting, that you can't look at especially a young child or a baby that they'll figure it out, that they'll be able to overcome this. Or the best one I used to hear from my son is, well, if he would just try harder. So with my son, even though his wasn't in the brain, his was in the sinuses, this was all infected. He had panniculitis for 3 years with Haemophilus influenza with staph. So he was just, his system was so heavy. You know, he went from this to, and it was just the mass within his body affected his development, and that mass, in a sense, affected my development as not only as a practitioner, but now as a trainer and development of not only this method, but with my theories in gravity. And because how each person processes the movement from within, the movement from within their body, that's one thing. And you and I, we can say we're built differently, but really under an x-ray, you should be able to pay for me to be playing in Cirque du Soleil, right? Because a person, we're all built the same in that aspect, but again, it's how we process our movement. I right now don't want to train for Cirque du Soleil, and you probably wouldn't want to pay to see me move like that. But you're watching me now to see how I understand movement, and that's what's a lot more important in your life. It's not about what someone else can do, it's about what you can do and what you can do better. And that are the things that we need to start looking at with infant development. First thing, the best gift you can give your child is movement. So anything that you're doing to restrict your child's movement, and worse, that you feel you need to restrict. So if you say, oh man, but my baby startles, that already is a warning sign. Oh my child can't sleep. This is already a warning sign. And I'm not saying that it's gonna lead to a brain tumor or brain trauma. But if you've had days in the NICUs and you know you had cord wrapped around the neck, there's so many other variations to this that will affect. But it is going to affect development. It's how we offer that nervous system a chance to redirect. So the effect isn't possibly as great, or we can keep a closer eye on it. So, because at that point too, if this child, like my child does, regresses, the road back up is a lot harder. It's one thing, sort of like a plane taking off. So have you ever heard this story? So there's a difference between someone that's flown for, let's say, the Navy, right? Because they're used to flying on aircraft carriers. So they come in low and fast. So if you're coming in to your local air, you're flying, and that guy takes the whole runway, and at the end bops down, most likely he was sea-based pilot, right? Whereas in general, most people use the whole runway. They come in sooner, and they're probably more Air Force. So again, it's just personality and what you're used to and how you're going to bring that plane in. As long as everyone's safe, that's all that matters. So when you're using those kind of dynamics, it's really the same with your development. So for a baby, you always want that bell curve to be hitting up. There's certain milestones that need to be hit for a reason. But again, when your child, and you know this, is starting off with brain trauma, and you're seeing these little attempts at try, that's not the way an infant develops. They need to develop with weight transfer. And again, weight transfer can't happen because one size is more than the other. But that's where you can either use our videos or come in and work with us, but start learning or submitting your videos to the group for Movement Lesson and Parents and Practitioners, which is over on Facebook, so you can learn how to help your child get the best start, because that's all that matters. Anybody who's working so your child gets the best start, please, if you know that you or even suspect you've had trauma, absolutely work with your medical professionals. That there's no question about that. But absolutely be involved from this day forward to help your child. If you're waiting for the diagnosis, again, and this is what happened to me, that bell curve went south. And now I had to bring it up. It's a completely different response to, and that's more what they call rehabilitation. What I'm talking about here is to get out right from the beginning with habilitation, meaning there's movements that you've never experienced before, and that's great. We all should be having that every day, experiencing new movements we've never had before, but that's what your child needs for its best start. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I love your comments. Bye.